Well, good evening. My name is Bill Purcell, and I am the director of the Institute of Politics here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Tonight's impressive panel is part of the Institute of Politics' 10th campaign for president, the manager's look at the 2008 election. The conference itself was created in 1972 and runs every 4 years. The Institute brings together campaign managers, national political reporters from major presidential campaigns to examine the campaign process. It provides, we believe, a rare and very special exchange of views about the strategies and the tactics that were employed by key decision makers in presidential campaigns. This results as well in the publication of a book that will be available in the spring. The people in this room know that the mission of the Institute of Politics is to unite and engage students, particularly undergraduates, with academics, politicians, activists, policymakers on a nonpartisan basis, and to stimulate and nurture their interest in politics and in public service. The Institute strives to promote greater understanding and cooperation between the academic world and the world of politics. It was established in 1966 as a living memorial to President John Kennedy. Tonight's event is an ideal example of our mission. We have, as you know, a very exciting panel moderated by Gwen Ifill. Gwen is the moderator and managing editor of Washington Week and senior correspondent for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Now in its 40th year, Washington Week is the longest-running news and public affairs program on public television. She has moderated the vice presidential debates, most recently the vice presidential debate in 2008. She's the author of a forthcoming book, one that has received some early attention, The Breakthrough, Politics and Race in the Age of Obama. A native of New York City, a graduate of Simmons College in Boston, Gwen has received honorary degrees. She has received the kind of excellence in broadcasting award for which I think we all recognize her. Serves on the board of the Committee to Protect Journalists, the Newseum, the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism. More importantly, she is and has been an important part of the Senior Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics. Please join me in welcoming Gwen Ifill.
Thank you. Thank you. I would stand up and do this, but this is more cozy, number one. And number two, I can still barely stand after my ankle injury a couple of months ago. So you don't mind my lovely footwear tonight as I sit here and try. Here we are in a year in which we've elected our first African-American president, and I get to share the stage with 4 white guys. I'm not certain how it worked out, but I'm happy to be here. What I'm really hoping for tonight is a conversation. In the tradition of the forum, we are looking forward to your questions as well. We don't believe, or at least I as moderator don't believe I hold all the wisdom, even though I hold most of it. And so I'm going to take up my part of the wisdom in the first little while and talk to these guys and get them to try to engage in a way that you never got to see them engage on Fox News Sunday. That is to say, in a conversational way, not necessarily shouting over each other. They're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, right. And hopefully to answer some of the questions that have been nagging and niggling at you in the long month since the campaign actually ended and we had to find out what to do with ourselves again when we weren't refreshing Real Clear Politics 12 times a day. So I want to start by asking the gentleman to my left a question about something that happens to be in the news today. So when was the last time you had a little chat with the governor of Illinois, David Axelrod?
Thankfully, a long time ago.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But
you want to clear up that little confusion?
you know, it's a painful thing for me coming from Illinois. It's a really appalling story, and there's not a whole lot to clean up. I mean, I think what's been said speaks to it. There's a vacancy. The governor apparently, if you believe the complaint of the government, had some ideas about what to do with it. We were not involved in that discussion or any discussion of that nature. And, the process will take place. The important thing from my standpoint as a resident of Illinois is that we now move from there and have a process that people can have some confidence in, select a United States Senator, and move forward and put this chapter behind us. So I'm looking forward to that.
I bet you are. It occurs to me I have neglected to properly introduce our panel. This is David Axelrod, Chief Strategist for the Barack Obama campaign, and now about to go into something he has no idea what awaits him, which is to work inside the White House as a political advisor to the president-elect. Next to him is David Plouffe, who is the campaign manager for Barack Obama. He's the guy who you mostly have only seen on those little video things when he sends them to you asking for more money all the time. Sounds like a couple people in here have received those. Next to him is Rick Davis, who is the campaign manager for John McCain and is now going back to private life, I believe, after having worked as hard as these guys did to try to get his man elected. We'll be back with that in a moment. And next to him is Bill Mcintyre, who was the pollster who looked at the numbers and tried to make sense of them and then tried in the end, I suspect, to explain which way they were going and remain optimistic right until the last moment. I want to start with you, Bill Mcintyre, because you did have a tough job there in the last week or so, and I saw you out there trying to say why the numbers were really breaking for your guy. Now it can be said, did you think that was really true?
On Tuesday, a week before the election, I think that what I was saying was the following things. One, I thought we were heading towards 130 million people in terms of turnout.
Which didn't happen.
No, it did. We're up to 130 million.
We are now?
We are up to 103 million. They keep counting votes. That's why it takes a month to certify. And the point, so I made the following points. Number one, that we were watching a race, and by the way, and I've seen their tracking now from last week. With 2 weeks to left, we were -10 in their tracking. The last week we were -6. So -6 is different than my number, but the point is you could still see an improvement from the second to last week to the last week. In our stuff, we saw that improvement, and what I was describing, what I hoped to have happen with the week left, was we had finally junked something called hybrid ads, which are horrible. We finally had rational ads on the air from the RNC as an IE. We had rational advertising. I felt that we were watching a race close. We had gone from -11 the day after the Powell endorsement to roughly -3 with a week left, and I hoped that we would close to within that range. I also believe that we would watch this 130 million people. I secretly hoped to be 135 million, and that at that range, models break down, that we had no model for that kind of turnout. And that historically, in a African-American versus white race, you've had extraordinary African-American turnout, and historically, you've had incredibly high turnout in rural areas that begin to offset that in ways that are hard to track. Again, as an enormous credit to President-elect and to their campaign, as a function of their money, the amount of money they spent in rural America to affect the margins and turnout, they did an extraordinary job. But I'm very comfortable with the following things. I'm very comfortable that we were a heck of a lot closer on Tuesday before the election and with a week left than we were 2 weeks earlier, that we were watching a race that was getting closer, that we had something rational to say, and that we were improving our situation. And as I said, now I have the advantage of seeing their tracking, which shows a net 4-point change during the second week to the last week as well.
I often hear politicians say after they lose a race that they just ran out of time.
No.
Is that what happened?
No, we lost, and it could have gone. And had we gone on 3 weeks longer, 7 weeks longer, they did a terrific job, and I appreciate Rick. I don't think there's anybody on our campaign that said, "Oh my gosh, we were just a few days short." I think we were happy it was over, and
in fact, something around the 15th of September would have been fine to just call it quits at that point, but
Rick, you said at one point, famously in this campaign, that this election was not about issues. You want to elaborate on that now, and I'd like everybody else to weigh in on that as well.
I think if you continue the sentence that I spoke that day, it's about a lot of the things. It's a lot of the things that make up a candidate. It's his character, it's his honesty, it's his trustworthiness, it's his ideology, which is not always an issue framework. And what I was saying at the time was that that's going to be the sum total of how people make their decisions in the polling booth on Election Day. And the question that was asked of me was, which issue is going to be the most decisive in this election? And the reality is, if you said, is there one issue that I think is the most decisive, certainly for us, it's probably the war in Iraq. I mean, I think Bill would probably agree, he might not, But that overshadowed almost everything we did throughout the course of our primary and the general election. And when it came into being, and whether that was in the form of the administration or some event or some speech or some activity, we saw an impact in our race. I mean, I think the one thing you got to understand too about the race is that the trading range on this thing for the last 4 months of the election was pretty close. I mean, it wasn't like there were these huge swings that we've seen in the past in presidential races where someone's 10 or 15 points up and then it gets closer and then somebody else goes up. I mean, the track on these things looks pretty smooth when you even it out over a 6-month period. And I just think that that shows you a little bit of where the country was in that they had a lot of conflicts themselves, and I don't think it were just issue-based.
David Plouffe, issues?
Well, we had some fun with Rick's comment, obviously, when he made it. I do agree. I mean, a presidential campaign and decision for voters is the most personal decisions they make, and so it is a lot about character. And I think the lawn campaign benefited us because Barack Obama was someone people didn't know that well. And I think we needed that time and exposure, and I think over 22 months his message was very consistent. He was a very steady person. I think the presidential debates served us very well because he was, in the course of those 3 debates and really the whole fall campaign, the same person day in and day out talking about the same issues. So I agree that it's not just about issues, but there's no doubt that issues were a driving part of this election, and obviously the economy got more and more important as the election went on. I mean, to the point about the end of the campaign, there's no doubt that national polls had some volatility within a range. We approached this campaign based that we were running 15 or 16 different campaigns in different states. It was always a pursuit of electoral college votes. And that was, we felt, I think, best about where we were the last couple of weeks because so many of the states that we had targeted, we thought we still had a pathway to victory. And so even if we lost the majority of the toss-ups, we were still going to find a way to 270 electoral votes. And I think that's very important. We viewed this through the prism, just as we viewed the primary for 12 months through the prism of Iowa. We viewed the general election solely through the prism of these states. How are we doing in Virginia? Do we still think we've got a pathway in Indiana? Are we putting away the carry states? And that's how we viewed the campaign. And at the end, there's no doubt that, and I think it opened up a little bit again that last weekend, but things had tightened up a little bit nationally. But in the states that would decide the presidency, we felt very good about where we were.
And those were the states.
You're allowed to answer your phone if it's the president-elect.
I didn't want to have an embarrassing situation, so I turned my phone off. Let me say a couple of things about what these guys said. First of all, one of the things I've always believed is that presidential campaigns are unique because of the intensity of the coverage and the interest. They're like MRIs for the soul. I mean, you can't hide who you are. Ultimately, by the end of a race, people know who you are. And we always thought that worked in our favor, that come the fall when people were really focused and when we had the convention and the debates, that would redound to our benefit. So, and I think that it did. On a macro level, though, this race was always about change. From the very beginning, 2 years before we started, 2 years before Election Day when we were thinking about the race, it was clear to us that it was going to be a race about change and that it was going to be defined by George W. Bush. I've said this before, but every race is defined by the incumbent, and in many ways more when an incumbent is leaving than when an incumbent is running for re-election and trying to shape their image. And almost never do people look for the replica of what they have. They almost always look for a remedy. And one of the premises of our race was that Obama represented the starkest change from George W. Bush in style and substance and in many different ways. Our other supposition was that John McCain, if he were the candidate who ran in 2000, was probably the best choice the Republicans had, the best chance to win a change election because he had been willing to challenge his party and so on. But that in order to become the nominee of the party, that he would have to make so many sacrifices and so many what we called Faustian bargains that he would emerge in a position where he no longer represented change. And I think that was the dynamic.
Is that what happened, Rick?
Well, to a large degree, I think that because the heavy investment we had in a debate within the primary, and I would say we tried to do as much as we can to preserve that. I mean, it was a bigger bargain for us to have to beat than for y'all, because just by being a Democrat, there was a change element to that, by nature. I would say that John is a risk taker as a candidate, and by tackling issues like the surge, which at the time the party wasn't even particularly behind. I mean, the Bush administration opposed the surge when John first talked about it, and obviously immigration reform, which the president was for, but the rest of the party pretty much opposed it.
But what was your biggest Faustian bargain?
Oh, look, I mean, I think that for my purpose, again, I mean, I don't want to beat a drum on this one issue because I don't think it was that dominant an issue, from the perspective of outcome. But there's no question that the war in Iraq and our involvement over there continued to plague us as a party and as a candidate for that party who was seen as, that was our connection to the Bush administration. And it was the easiest connection to make and also the most intense one. When you, test somebody's vulnerabilities, I promise you that's probably the one that had the most saliency for it.
See, there's no doubt, Bill, hang on one second. There's no doubt that the war was a complicated issue. But by the time people voted, it wasn't the issue, I think, that was driving their vote. I think the economy was driving their vote. And I would argue that the biggest Faustian bargain that McCain made was switching his position on the tax cuts, which were the centerpiece of the Bush economic plan. He had opposed them originally. He said that they were too skewed to the wealthy. Later, when they were going to be renewed, he said we'd never cut taxes in wartime, and it was irresponsible to do so. And then after 2004, he embraced them. And by the time the campaign rolled around, he was enthusiastic about them. So he essentially tied himself to the Bush economic nostrums. And that was ultimately a great advantage for us in the campaign.
Rick is nodding. Bill, do your numbers back that up?
Well, no, I just want to go back to Iraq because I think it's really important because here's the irony of this race.
And then we'll come back to the economy.
Yeah, no, I'm going to get to this. I'm going to be quicker. Look, in Iraq, you have a candidate in John McCain who famously opposed George Bush in 2000. In 2000, our policy was we're going to have tax cuts only for people who make less than 100,000. We're going to fully fund Social Security. It was a very different Republican campaign. However, by the way, in 2000, John said, if it was a recession, I'd cut taxes for everybody. But in Iraq, the point was we do the surge. John's been for it from like 2004, 5, and 6. And we are the leading critic of the Bush administration. And then we get to January of 07. And then guess what? The Bush administration, the president adopt the surge. We go on TV in January and then meet the press or some huge thing. And I, of course, was saying, look, we have to say over and over and over again, here's where I've been for years. The president's behind me. We've got to split ourselves from the president. And John was very, very temperate in a way that really affected our donors or base. And I call up and Mark Salter and say, what you need? He said, Bill, we're negotiating with the White House for how many troops there are going to be in Iraq. We cannot be on air being that distant from the president at the same weekend we're negotiating over the number of troops. And it speaks to, again, and so what happens, and what really happened is John McCain essentially became the Bush spokesperson and the administration's spokesperson on Iraq. And what happened to us is Iraq was an issue that hurt our left-of-center independent and Democrat base. It hurt us with Republicans. And by the time we had our May track, I said, we've managed to get a twofer. We are picking up ground with conservatives in Iowa and Iraq and other conservatives, and we're losing everywhere amongst Iraq, amongst natural McCain person, and then the immigration stuff's imploded our conservatives. So in typical John McCain fashion, we have managed to alienate every side of our political party.
Well, let me use that to get back to the economy, because it seemed that he was also put in the position of having to speak the president's line when he came to talking about the economy, when he said that the fundamentals are strong. That's the same thing that the president was saying at the time.
Yeah, but I don't think he was trying to toe the line of the administration at that point.
What was he trying to do?
Look, I mean, John McCain is the eternal optimist. And I think if you track the kinds of things he says about the economy or the war or anything else, he is heavily invested in the ability of the American public to persevere over any obstacle. And I think it's pretty clear, at that time that, he was trying to be the cheerleader for the American public and the American businessman. I mean, I don't think he was trying to make a statement on the technicalities of the economy. Frankly, we all know that's not something he talks about very often. But look, I mean, I think if he had a lot of things to do over again in this campaign, that'd be one he wanted to, do a redo on.
And that's one you, David, would prefer.
And obviously, I think David Axelrod's right when he says that the emergence of the economy is an issue that overrode the Iraq issue. That just made sort of bad to worse for us. I mean, because there's only one other thing I think that the American public held the Bush administration responsible for, aside from Iraq that they disliked so much, and that was the worst economy in a lifetime. And that's another sort of tough thing. That's a slight disadvantage.
And for us, when we got into the general election 3 months later than these guys did, so we had to catch up on our research. On the economy, voters did think that McCain was aligned with Bush, but not to the degree we needed them to think that. So we had a lot of work to do there. But in June, they did not believe so much that McCain was out of touch. And really what developed is two things. The House issue obviously was one moment that kind of broke through, but it was the fundamentals of the economy. I mean, when you talk to voters, things really turned after that. They would say, I'm afraid he's going to be too much like Bush on the economy. And they'd add, and I think he just doesn't get what I'm going through. And we didn't have that in the beginning of the general election.
Let me say something parenthetically about Rick's comment and why it was taken, why we worked with it the way we did and why it was received the way it was when you made the comment about issues. One of the problems that people felt existed with Bush, and I think that it ended up moving and tainting McCain, was a sense of obliviousness to what was going on in the country. And there was and is, and justifiably so, a real sense of urgency about the problems facing the country. And so that's why that quote, and completely accepting that you went on to say more, but that's what that quote said. And so did when Senator McCain couldn't name the number of houses that he owned, it contributed to that. But when on the 15th of September, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and John McCain said the fundamentals of the economy are strong. I understand about cheerleading, but when your team's down 72-6, it's a tough thing to do. And then he had to revise his position throughout the next 9 days. And I would argue, and I've said this before, that this campaign was won between September 15th, ultimately. I mean, I think the fundamentals were good for us, but this race was won from September 15th when he made that comment through September 26th, the first presidential debate.
David Plouffe, I want to talk to you, both of you, because about some scary moments that you must have had during the campaign, which is during the Reverend Jeremiah Wright's introduction to America. You said to me at one point during the middle of this that, you know, if the right thing ended up the way it looked like it was going, which is it looked like it was never ending, then maybe it would prove that America just wasn't ready for who your candidate was. What did you do wrong? How did you let that get out of control so that it almost threatened to consume your campaign?
Yeah, what did you do?
Yeah, what did you do?
Well,
I was in the men's
exactly,
room.
yeah.
I'm getting to you, Axelrod.
Well, first, I would say that our candidate did a lot right, more so than, I mean, we failed as a campaign, to do the proper research there, to have a full understanding. We knew that, some of what he had said was going to be an issue. We faced this the day we announced for president. Mm-hmm. The story came out in Rolling Stone, if I recall, that had some comments that were problematic. So, but we hadn't done as thorough research, looked through every tape, looked through every sermon. And I think that, so the ferocity with which we dealt with that, I think took us by surprise. I think reporters could tell that we were taken by surprise. And it was a moment of great peril. And I think that, those I think it was about 4 days. He, on a Friday in March, did a round of cable interviews, and then, got us on the phone and said, guys, I don't think that's enough. I want to give a speech on race. This wasn't a discussion. It was a decision he made.
And this was something you did not agree with necessarily.
No, we didn't. No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think that,
we have a better idea.
Yeah. I mean, what he said was that, clearly from a political standpoint, this is a moment of great peril and requires more than the typical political response. But, I have got a lot to say about this. I think it requires a thoughtful speech. It's a speech only I can write. And either people accept it or they won't, and I might not be president. But it was a moment I think we were really proud to be working for him, because the political playbook in Washington doesn't really follow that route all the time. And so I thought, and we had two moments of this, okay? We had the moment when it first was exposed and then the speech, and obviously he went on his little media tour.
Meaning Reverend Wright.
Reverend Wright, right before the Indiana-North Carolina primaries, after we had lost Pennsylvania. And at a really inopportune time, obviously. So we had two moments. Now, the truth is, in the general election, I heard Bill talk about this last week when we were together. The truth is, voters had digested Reverend Wright, and it gave some of them indigestion. I don't want to minimize it. But it was a known fact. People had seen the tapes. They had talked about it a lot.
So let me get this right.
So the
Even if-
notion that somehow, if they had introduced this,
Well,
in
that's
my
what I'm
view-
going to ask
yeah.
you. Even if that had come up in the fall, you don't think it would have?
Yeah.
Speak to, again, good decisions in the campaign and what candidates do. It was John McCain's, when you talk about an optimistic instinct, it was a John McCain personal instinct to say, I will never talk and I will never use this in the campaign. And they have heard me now talk through one of these sessions, and I said, it's for me, I had done some primary work in presidential campaigns. This is the first general election I've done, and it was so interesting because running for president is different than running even for governor of California, a huge statewide race. You have a different responsibility. And the point is, inside our campaign, two things. First, that was John's decision, and that was it. That's what Rick did through the entire campaign. That's your candidate decision. Number two, I have to recognize the pressure on Rick from the party and the enormous pressure on Rick to engage in this issue in September and October, and the pressure he was under to fight that off. And then
Did you ever try to talk the candidate out of it?
No, but let me finish. And three, no, by the way, no, you don't try to talk to John out of this something. You just, we're with him a long time.
If he changes his mind, he'll let you know.
Okay.
He's pretty good about that.
But three, the point is, I said, look, if we do win, we're going to win with about 273 electoral votes, and we'll lose the popular vote by 3 million. That's the happy scenario. And I want you to imagine that if our candidate or any candidate used that issue aggressively and you won the presidency that way, you'd already be delegitimized as a president. You couldn't functionally govern. And so John did it for his own instincts and personal reasons. But then the last thing I would say in supporting Rick in terms of fighting off that pressure is I'd say, well, we're losing people 18 to 29 years old by roughly 30 points. Please tell me how that's going to improve our margin with those voters. We're losing Latinos by roughly 40 points. How would that issue improve those margins? In other words, John did it for instinctively all the right reasons, but by October, when you look at how we were losing the race, anybody who believed that this issue would have affected the groups we're losing by those kind of margins has never actually talked to anybody in those subgroups about how they felt about this issue.
I just wanted to add something to David's account of this because it kind of fills in the picture of what those days were like because, you know, the political community was in a frenzy. Whenever things like this happened, we were the recipients of lots of generous advice from people in Washington. You know, it was a nervous time. The one person who wasn't nervous was Barack Obama. Now, he said to us on this Friday night, I want to give a speech on race. The thing you left out was, and I want to give it no later than Tuesday. And we said, well, you're campaigning, and he said, and I have to write it. We said, well, you're campaigning all day Saturday. We've got a film shoot set up for Sunday. You're campaigning all day Monday. When are you going to write it? He said, don't worry about it. He said, I know what I want to say. And so Saturday night, he dictated an outline to John Favreau, his speechwriter. Favreau sent back a fleshed-out outline. Sunday night, Obama started writing at about 10 o'clock at night after he put his kids to bed. He wrote until 3 in the morning, and he got halfway through the speech or something. We leave 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday for Pennsylvania. He campaigns till 9 o'clock, 9:30 that night, and then goes to his room to finish the speech. And the speech that he was giving 12 hours later, maybe the most important speech of the campaign. And yet I went to sleep. I just went to sleep because I had this confidence. I've known this guy for a long time, and I knew that he knew exactly what he wanted to say and that he would say it very well. And I woke up about 2 in the morning, and there was the speech on my BlackBerry, and I spooled through the speech, and I got to the end of it, and I emailed him back, and I said, this is why you should be president. Because I don't know anybody else who could have done what he did under the pressure that he was under and produced that thoughtful kind of speech. And it was a really, and then the next day, of course, was an unbelievably emotional moment when he gave the speech.
Let me ask you, Rick, and then I want to move on to another question before I open up to questions from the audience. Rick, how complicated was it for you, or was it complicated to run against a candidate who had a potential for making history, whether it would have been a woman, if it had been Hillary Clinton, or Barack Obama as an African American? How much did you have to tiptoe around things you couldn't say?
No, I don't think so very much. I mean, look, we knew what we were in for from the day this campaign started. I mean, you just knew this was going to be a different cycle. And I think because people had a burden of a war, 2 wars going on, we had no idea, a year and a half, 2 years out, what kind of economic crisis we were already in, and just didn't even know it. but you just knew it was going to be a different kind of cycle. And look, I don't think John McCain or our campaign would have conducted ourselves any other way, regardless of who the opponent was. I mean, obviously there was more pressure. Obviously there was more focus and intensity. I think the pollsters will tell you this is probably the most watched campaign, more intently than any other presidential campaign in polling history. So, everything was amplified. I mean, this was, when you start doing TV, you sit around with all these geniuses who are probably back there behind the camera and say, when you're on television, every little remark, every little movement is exaggerated. Well, this was a television campaign. Everything that happened, whether it was like my comments at the convention on issues, is exaggerated. Everything was focused on. And to be honest with you, people like me, I'm kind of old school. I mean, the next generation of people doing this, it's a great lesson to learn. You're not behind the scenes anymore. Everything you do is a campaign. Every memo you write, every email you send, every internet interview you do, every blog post that's written is going to cover your actions, regardless of whether you're the candidate or the staff. And it's a new campaign. And the old days of being able to sit in a room and make plans and not reading about them in a blog post an hour later are over. I mean, you guys had great discipline, but we didn't in that regard. And the reality is you just got to get used to it. And so I think we already had our antenna up. It was something that we learned in the primaries ourselves. I mean, we had a unique experience in a primary. I do not encourage anybody to try and win this way in the future. But it trains you to be a little more cautious, a little more careful, a little more sure of yourself, because for our case, we had one way to victory. We didn't have options. We had to dig out of a hole, and the only way we did it is if we really focused. And I think that helped us in the general one we went through.
You talked about John McCain's reputation as a risk taker. Close your eyes and be as honest as you can with me on this. In the end, was Sarah Palin a help or a hurt?
Well, I think, first of all, I think you have to set the stage a little bit, we were losing. I mean, and there were not great prospects for victory back in, July and August of this year. So I think when you look at it in the context of the decisions you make based on whether or not you will have an opportunity to govern, you got to win first. And I think for practical purposes, when you look at the field that our party had to pick from, I mean, one of the lessons that I learned in this campaign is we got to work on our bench. We have to do a better job of bringing governors, congressmen, mayors, senators. We need more diversity. We need more.
Okay, but
youth.
back to.
Well, I am, but I mean, that's my whole point. You get what you pay for, and so.
Oh, I'm not going to touch that.
Now that I'm in the private sector again, I can say things like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, everything we did from probably, I'd say, May on, was risky from a political perspective. Was it any more or less risky than some of the other things we did? Probably not. Did it look risky on the 6th of September? No. Did it look riskier on the 1st of October? Yes. So, I mean, everything's got a grade. And I think, by and large, we felt we made a good decision. John was very happy with it. He is to this very day. And I think he'd have made the same decision all over again.
Did it take till October 1st in the poll numbers?
I'm sorry, what?
Did it take till October 1st in the poll numbers for it to look like
Well,
that's
just
a good
to
idea?
when talk about Rick's perspective, I have done polling. I'm doing polling for NBC Wall Street Journal for years. I took a hiatus for the campaign, but in September of this year, Sarah Palin and Al Gore, 92, will have the highest favorable positive ratings in NBC polling of any of the VP candidates. And I would say on her behalf, her numbers went up after the convention, her numbers went up after the debate, and her numbers went up the last week. So the 3 times that America saw Governor Palin and not the caricature of Governor Palin, her numbers improved. And by the way, today, and the numbers that we released for NBC Wall Street Journal today, we tested 6 or 7 different Republicans. Her very favorable among Republicans is the highest of any Republican, higher than John McCain's, higher than the president's, higher than Condi Rice's. So among Republicans, she today has the strongest very favorable rating probably of any Republican in the country.
Does that argue for the deeper bench that Rick is talking about?
It argues for our recognizing that the governor is somebody who has substantial strengths, who brought substantial assets. We got a huge surge. The day she was picked and after that convention is when the fundraising kicked off. in terms of our intensity of our base, the events, her performance at those events, and her standing in this campaign, I think we need to recognize that Governor Palin has entered this campaign with a substantial political following in this party that will make her a player over the next 4 to 8 years.
I want to ask you guys, if you want to talk about Sarah Palin, you can, but the last question is to ask you about Joe Biden. There are those who argue he didn't bring that much to the ticket in the end, and that the support that you got and the excitement had to do with the guy at the top,
Well,
that he just
that's
didn't do
good.
any hurt.
That's as it should be, isn't it? But the truth of the matter is, I mean, this is really interesting, and you know, these forums are really very useful. I think we all learned a lot from each other. And a week ago, I have a much different view of that decision than I did coming in. I mean, I still think that it was, in the end, a very negative decision for them. And I'll get to the Biden thing in 1 second. And for this reason, all summer long, the McCain campaign, or from August through that decision, their campaign was predicated on this celebrity notion that we were an undeserving celebrity candidate. Barack Obama was a celebrity, inexperienced. John McCain was a guy who put country first, and that was their campaign. And then they nominated Sarah Palin for vice president. And in one stroke, our view was that they kind of blew up what they had done the month before, and now they were fighting on our turf, which was change. And our feeling was that one of the things, when this gets to Biden, one of the things that Obama said throughout the vice presidential process, and there was a lengthy, exacting process, was he gave great weight to people who had been on the national track before, who had been through this process, because he knew from his own experience jumping in when he did and under bright, intense lights, how difficult it is and how challenging. And he didn't want to put a vice presidential candidate through that who wasn't prepared for that. Our feeling was, when they picked Governor Palin, it didn't matter how talented she was, it was an enormous burden to place on her to expect her to perform well, having been brand new to the national scene. We feel that Joe Biden ended up as the most popular figure in the race, actually, by the end of the race. And he did very, very well for us. We wanted him because people wanted to balance the ticket, we felt, with someone who was experienced in Washington, who had some gray hairs. They thought Obama was change enough, and they wanted someone who could help them implement that change. And that Biden was someone who spoke to that working class, middle class voter who we were contending for vigorously, and spoke to their experience, you know, the whole Scranton, Pennsylvania experience, and Wilmington, now famously ruined by Saturday Night Live.
Tell me about ruined by
fair enough.
I got Queen Latifah, so I was happy with Sarah.
But I think we honestly felt, and I know that the president-elect feels, that Joe Biden was an enormous asset to us in the campaign.
And I think on Governor Palin,
Before you answer that, David, if you have questions, start lining up at the microphones here, because we like to get to as many as possible.
I have no doubt. I mean, obviously, from a financial standpoint, which is not insignificant, from a turnout standpoint, which, you know, I think John McCain had some turnout challenges. We were, I think, for some time on the trajectory to great turnout, so those were important. But if you look at states, Colorado, parts of Florida, Northern Virginia, the Philadelphia suburbs, I do think that Governor Palin, and that's rare for a vice presidential pick, impeded McCain's progress of swing voters, particularly women. What we saw was really right after the selection, independent swing women were very negative towards the pick. And so I think it did have some consequence in some pockets of some of these swing states. And I think on Biden, I think on the whole, macro, I agree completely with David, Biden helped fill in what people are looking for from Obama's choice. But he also was out there every day in these battleground states delivering a great economic message. And we'd look, you know, Biden might say something that would get the cable TV chattering. But we'd look at the press he was getting in his 3 stops in those swing states. And it was just relentlessly on message about the economic crisis the middle class was facing. He was very disciplined out there. And that's, you know, was very important to us, that's the most important decision you make in a presidential campaign, I think, is the allocation of your nominee and your vice presidential's time. What are they doing every day? What did you get out of that stop that day? And Biden, you know, just time after time and time, was just delivering great performances for us out there in tough parts of these battleground states for us.
I want to give you a few of the rules of the road here. One is, when you introduce yourselves, please say who you are, where you're from, that sort of thing, not too much. Make sure you give us nice, concise questions that end with a question mark. And I will reserve the right to police you and make sure that you get to your question, as I have done with these gentlemen, or attempted to. Now, I have a million more questions left. I'm not going to be able to get to them, so I'm hoping you will. And I'm going to start up here with you, gentlemen, in the jacket.
Thank you very much. My name is Ben Nelson. I'm a sophomore at the college from Sturgis, South Dakota. My question concerns polling, specifically the differences between public and private polling, and how, as a campaign operator or manager, you, well, first of all, whether you trust one more than the other, and second of all, how you predicate your decisions based on polls and which polls you make those decisions based on.
You trust the good ones that show you up, and you don't trust the bad ones.
Yeah, I was going to turn to Bill for that.
Sturgis, South Dakota, was that where that motorcycle rally was?
Yes.
By the way, talk about a risk taker.
Again, why don't we talk about what you can't teach a candidate? John went to do that event because we said we got to show this guy a little more zip. We go do that motorcycle event, and that was right after the Berlin speech. And John says, you know, maybe my opponent wants to hear the roar of the crowd in Germany. I love the roar of a Harley Davidson. And 50,000 people just went, and it was an incredible video. It was a great moment. Now I'm just, too bad he didn't know about it was a topless event when he said his poor wife. But
What?
Answer his question.
No.
You see what I had to go through for 2 years.
Which polls do you believe?
Yeah,
well,
Trying to help you here.
Mine. Here's what I say to people, which is when I try to argue why you do private polling and not just stuff in public. Although, by the way, I do think the Real Clear Politics averages are very powerful, and they once again work very well in terms of overall margins. But what you do, first off, our stuff asks a lot of very different stuff than you do in public polling. You asked really famously, and something I'm really concerned about, which is in the last few weeks, is your opinion more favorable, less favorable about the candidate, and we do an open end why. It's an incredibly powerful question. We were getting swamped by media, and we were dropping to like a 50% less favorable in the last couple of weeks, and guess what? Your campaign begins to crush. And then here's the second thing. When I've made a mistake in a state, it has consequence. We never get hired again. When public polling makes a mistake, these polls go on over and over and over again, and there's an accountability to working in a campaign where the numbers have to be right and your advice is right, or you don't have a career. And it creates a little more tension every day to make sure your stuff is right. I do think our internal stuff was wrong in one state. I didn't do, another pollster did, and we were wrong. And we missed the Southwest. According to the exit polls, the Latino vote in New Mexico went from 34 to 41. That's extraordinary if it's true, and there's an extraordinary Hispanic turnout in Nevada, far larger than I thought. And so there's some states, and I think those 2 or 3 are ones that where we missed. But I think, frankly, if you look at our state tracks, and you look, and as Rick said, because we had the same thing, our last track had us down 5 on Monday night, and you look at our last state tracks, yeah, okay, I missed the Hispanic thing in 2 states, but our last tracks were on everywhere, and I think overall that it did help what we're supposed to do, which is to direct resources in the campaign.
Next question.
My name is Teresa Tui. I'm an activist in Natick, Massachusetts. I just got off of managing a state rep campaign in the area. I agree, David, that it was about the economy because in the summer, for my candidate, I knocked on 3,000 doors, and Democrats and unenrolled voters were really undecided about the economy. So that's my anecdotal. My question is, I would think a lot about the Rules Committee in the June meeting. How do you think the primary would have changed, or your strategy might have changed if the Rules Committee had seated Michigan and Florida differently?
Well, Fluff was in charge of that, so I'll let him.
Well, I don't think at that point it would have made much of a difference. I think the big question is, if Florida and Michigan had been valid contests, how would that have altered the calendar?
I suppose that's the question.
And you know, the Clinton folks controlled the Rules Committee. They had a majority, and we were very surprised back in the summer of '07 that the Rules Committee unanimously voted to fully sanction Florida and Michigan. Now, that was our viewpoint. We did what we could to help that along, but we did not control that process. And so my view was, if you had an ability to choose your preferred calendar, it was your obligation to do so. And we like the way Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, we always thought Clinton would have an advantage of, but South Carolina. February 5th for us, 22 primaries, huge states. We weren't going to have a lot of time to campaign there. We weren't going to have weeks of advertising. We were terribly frightened of February 5th. Sure. And Hillary Clinton was, you know, even a month out ahead in all of those states, including the caucus states. So the only way that we could survive February 5th was to go into that with maximum velocity. And South Carolina gave us the opportunity, potentially, to have a big win as the last contest before February 5th. Now, we thought if Michigan actually counted on January 15th, we could probably do pretty well there. Whether we'd win or not, I don't know, but close. Florida was concerning to us. And if that Florida primary, coming 3 days after South Carolina had happened, it might have mitigated all of the momentum out of South Carolina. In fact, we might not be the nominee. So it's things like that that haven't gotten much attention. And you know, it took us, and then we all took a vow to not campaign in those two states. It was codified. And when they agreed to do it, the Clinton campaign, you know, I was very surprised because we then had the calendar that we preferred. And so by the time we get into redos in Florida and Michigan and what was going to happen to the delegates, it was clear it was not going to alter the delegate race to a great degree. And so it was more coming in for a soft landing. And we were able to do that at that Rules Committee meeting. But really, the whole Florida-Michigan story is one I think that's very, very important, because if we hadn't had that moment of velocity coming out of South Carolina, particularly having lost the New Hampshire primary, I don't know if we could have survived February 5th. And the fact on that day, which we thought was really going to be our toughest challenge, that we won more states and more delegates, it was really about 3 a.m. February 6th that I thought, all things being equal, we're going to be the Democratic nominee, because we just survived the greatest threat to our candidacy, until Jeremiah Wright.
Did you say 3 a.m.? What is it about that time?
I know. Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way. You deserve a lot of credit.
Your question, sir.
I am Joel Cadiz. I'm a mid-career master's in public administration student here at Kennedy School. My question is for David Axelrod. One of the things that I admire about Mr. Obama is that he's a very steady person. And he has said a number of times that he cannot be too happy or too sad. And this is just like Nelson Mandela saying that his greatest lesson from being jailed for 26 years was mastery of his emotions. Or Charles de Gaulle saying that one thing that I must learn is to control myself.
And your question?
Yes. Mr. Obama has also great intuition. And my question is, a few weeks ago, Ms. Jarrett was considered to be a candidate to fill in the Senate seat of Mr. Obama. And then a few days after, she took herself out of that race, and she was also appointed as, almost simultaneously appointed as senior advisor to Mr. Obama. Was there an intuition that Governor Blagojevich was trying to, or would try to squeeze something?
That was a very sneaky way of getting to that question. I just want to,
Yeah.
I give you credit, but I didn't see it coming.
I'm still thinking about Mandela.
Well, I was trying to set the tone first.
Setting you up.
Well, let me answer the first part of your question first. No, listen, the truth is that the president-elect, Valerie Jarrett, is a longtime friend, advisor, very able person, and his preference was always that she serve in the White House. And ultimately, he expressed that to her and said, look, I just need you. And that's why she made the decision. No one in their wildest imagination could have imagined the scenario that ensued. But let me take the occasion to comment on the first part, because that quality of steadiness I think was very, very important. I believe this election was very much like the election of 1980. I think the country was poised for change, demanding change, and the only question ultimately that they needed answered was whether Barack Obama was safe change. And I think that was the same as was true in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. And I think the reason that this race was won, as I said, between the 15th and the 26th of September, is because we had a crisis that no one anticipated. And the manner in which Obama handled himself during that crisis and the manner in which he handled himself in that first debate in many ways ended the question for a lot of voters who wanted change but were uncertain. And so that quality of steadiness, I think, was a very big part of the equation in terms of our victory.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Next
Hi,
question.
Catherine Bracey from Harvard's Berkman Center. My question is for Mr. Davis. Can you talk about the process behind making the decision to suspend the campaign and whether, in hindsight, you think that was a mistake?
She used quote marks.
Air quotes.
Yeah.
Did you learn that from McCain? He would do that incessantly, and I hated that. It's the only thing I was like, quit doing this. So to answer your question, that was a very tough time. I mean, and I think everybody, anytime you flip a coin and say, okay, what's going to happen now? We like some level of stability. I mean, we like a playing field where you sort of figure out what the advantages and disadvantages are, and all of a sudden the whole thing blows up, and everybody's at risk. So I think to some degree, I agree that that was a period of time where people were making decisions. It was a late breaking event. Nothing has affected American politics in a way that this has, I think, in that kind of a context, that late in an election. So a lot of it also is circumstantial when you get into these things. We were in New York, and we were having a meeting of our economic team. I think it was like the day or day after Lehman went down. And that was huge. I mean, there were people who, they weren't jumping out of windows on Wall Street, but they were pretty freaked out. And we had a lot of them sitting around a breakfast table. And every one of them to an individual, very esteemed, very bright financiers and economists, all to an individual, and they rarely all agree on anything, thought this was a seismic event that we were going through, that it would cripple international financial markets, seize credit, and throw our country into an economic spiral that could be a death spiral. And it was probably one of the most important meetings that you're able to participate in a campaign, because these were not just sort of campaign tactics or strategies to employ to get issues that are out. This is a real defining moment where you're trying to decide what to do. There is no game plan. There is no scorecard that you can look down and say, let's run that play. And John came out of that and came back into an ante room with the staff who were there with him and said, we've got to do something about this. Now, this is the same guy who, the minute he hears a Reverend Wright commercial in North Carolina, says, stop it. I mean, he does not ponder things in a way that is in any kind of a gray area for him. He understood to the core that this was an important historic moment where action was necessary. He was not thinking in terms of what's the best thing for me to do with my presidential campaign. As someone who's given him political advice for 10 years, this is a reoccurring thing with John McCain. I mean, you don't start your primary campaign with a plan to change immigration. You don't start your campaign in 2000 with a plan to change campaign finance reform. I mean, these are things that he believed in, he embraced, and he does regardless of what the political calculations are. And it's our job in our business to try and make the best of it that you can. And that's exactly the situation that we face. It wasn't a political calculation to say, let's go do this. I mean, you look at the spiraling effect of that, and by the way, the most damaging was pissing off Letterman. I mean, that was probably the most dangerous thing that we did in the entire campaign by dumping him. Of course, we had to go see Katie Couric, which didn't help matters much. But tonight, John McCain is on Letterman. So please be sure to watch later this evening and watch them make up, hopefully, It won't be as tough as this panel, but I hopefully think
So
it'll
you
be
TikTok
entertaining.
Letterman and Boehner in about 48 hours.
Yeah.
That was good.
So I mean, it was something that was not done with the idea of winning the campaign, but trying to do something that we thought was important. And of course, when you look at the actions of Congress, it was exacerbated by the actions of our own party, who appeared to be damaging our efforts to try and manage an economy. So throwing yourself in the middle of that is probably not the greatest thing you want to do. Look, the last thing I thought I was going to be doing in September is lobbying Congress. I mean, I know I'm the greatest lobby on the face of the earth. I've read that. I've heard about it. I mean, but even I couldn't get the House Republicans to do the right thing that next day. So
we're going to try to get through as many more as possible, so we're going to ask for answers and questions to be kind of brief. Yes.
Thank you. My name's Eva Lamb. I'm a junior at the college, and I'm here with the Harvard College Democrats, who in the course of the 2 months between the start of our semester here and the presidential election knocked on, I think, about close to 18,000 doors in New Hampshire. So my question is about the ground game. What was the importance of the field campaign? What did your campaigns do right? What did they do wrong? And how did it make a difference?
It made all the difference in the world to us. We wouldn't have won the nomination without a good ground game. And I think in the general election, there's a few parts of it that are important. First of all, thank you. What you did is really the story of our campaign. And for those of us that have done this for a long time, it was inspiring every day to get up and know that we were joined by millions of Americans who were at our side, who didn't have the time to do this, and had 2 jobs and kids, and they were spending 20, 25 hours a week on it. It was remarkable.
And we're ditching their classes.
Ditching their classes. Attendance was way down in battleground states, which I'd say, first of all, is important to us because we did, as you know, it wasn't just turnout and registration. We did a lot of persuasion. It was important, given who our candidate was. He was an unconventional candidate, that we had people in communities who were vouching for him. A lot of Republicans and independents and Democrats who hadn't been engaged in a long time, working their neighbors and saying, here's why I'm for him. I'm surprised I'm for him, but I am, and here's why. We spent a lot of time, and this was really hard to do, making sure that our volunteers were up on the news of the day. So if they're on the phones or at a door and they hear about Rick's latest Bill Ayers ad, they know what to say about it. That they were very dynamic. And that's really important, to help people sort through the election, because there's nothing better than a contact between a human being and a human being, particularly if it's related. It helped us with turnout. There's no doubt that we got the turnout we needed to get. They did in some states and not in some others. The registration we did was enormously impactful. It changed some states. Without the registration that we got in North Carolina and Indiana, we would not have won those 2 states. Pennsylvania would have been a lot closer without the registration. So in every way, and the great thing about it is, one, our candidate believed in it. From the get-go, he said, I'm going to run a grassroots campaign. It was just integral to who we were. And so when we thought about how we were going to handle an issue, sure, it's what David might say on TV and what Barack might say out on the stump, but it was also what our volunteers in the states were going to be saying. And our campaign really was the art of the possible, because we had such intense support that anything we wanted to do within reason in a state, we could do. And so we were able to talk at a persuasion level into Republican universes and independent universes. Democrat surge voters, we could talk to them not on the phone, at their doors 4, 5, 6 times. It was just a remarkable tool to have. And my hope is that it, in some way, that continues on, because to see that kind of engagement in politics is something that was a remarkable thing to see. It helped our campaign selfishly, but I think it was good for the country.
I just want to say 2 quick things. 2 quick things. First, this is under-recognized that what the John McCain campaign accomplished is the Bush campaign was correctly and famously kind of, famous for what they did in 2004, and the McCain campaign outdid all of those marks. So when we talk about how extraordinary this campaign was, look, you guys, all these marks should beat us, but the level of personal contact in this country and personal work on all sides is at anything we can measure an historic high, which is incredibly exciting and vibrant for the future. The second thing is, they always say, gee, we were 3 months late getting the table in the general election. It was early April. I had just read they had 1,000 paid field people. 1,000 paid field people. Rick asked me, Mcintyre, come over and brief our field staff. They've all assembled around the country. I walk in and there's 61 people. And I said, Rick, now there must be a closed circuit TV for the other 944 people, right, Rick? Because no, this is pretty much it. And so what I'm suggesting is, again, that extraordinary campaign with that money on both sides made such an extraordinary difference for how deep those ground thing was after a function of that Democrat primary. It's unbelievable.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name's Jim Secreto, and I'm a graduate school at the Kennedy School and a student of Stan Greenberg and Jim Rosner for many years. My question has to do with data and performance measurement and how a modern campaign utilizes that. Not necessarily just with polling, which we all know about, but your ones and twos that you get from your field organizers, from the goals the dollar goals you set for your fundraisers every week, month, quarter, and how you sort of use that information in real time to make your decisions and make your strategies. Did you use it? How'd you use it? Do you think that's the future of campaigns? And appreciate you being here.
And try to stay out of the weeds for those of us who don't, study field organizing.
Well, I'm sure Rick will add to this. Obviously, campaign's about message delivery at the candidate level, but at the campaign level, it is about numbers. And, going back to Iowa, even our own survey data showed a different race than our field data did. And it was very instructive to us because we hit our 90,000 target for ones and twos 2 days out. And if you believe the field data, and it was a leap of faith because 2/3 of our supporters had never caucused before. But if you believe that they were going to come out, we were going to win with some margin. The Des Moines Register poll actually captured a lot of what happened. That taught us a lot. So even now, to Bill's point, your own polling is very important. You test a lot of messages and a lot of back and forth, but leaving aside the message value of it, you're in the field a lot. You're in the same state, some every night, every week, and so with the same pollster and the same voter file and the same data. So there's a consistency to the data. But on our own campaign, polling was just one way we viewed how we were doing in the state in the general election. We had a lot of voter identification work. We had a lot of field data. So we'd put all that together and model out the election in those states every week. So we'd say, okay, if the election were held this week based on all our data, put it all in the blender, where are we? And obviously, with technology today, we could measure this very carefully. We don't have to wait for a state to report in how they did that night. We can look at it, down to the volunteer level, because we trusted our volunteers. We gave them the voter file. We said, here are the people on your block. You go talk to them. You record the result of the conversation. We in Chicago could look at that. And so from a management perspective, it's great. It takes all the BS out of, I made 100 calls last night, and 50-50. I mean, you could just, the rubber hits the road and you can see what happens. So it makes you enormously agile. You've got real-time data, and that makes you make scheduling decisions and resource allocation decisions and where to send surrogates. And you're adjusting those, by the end, multiple times a day. Not just down to the media market, but down to chunks of voters in those media markets. We're not doing as well as we need to here, so we've got to throw all of our resources in there. These guys are making a surge in a media market. We've got to go try and correct that.
And one of the things that's a real challenge, for a hierarchy of a campaign is managing all that information. I mean, David's right. I mean, when you can literally look at real time on a screen and see phone calls being made out of 300 centers from around the country and literally be tabulating the results of those in real time, that's just sort of a window of one little piece of data you get. You compare that to whatever kind of micro-targeting data you have, and you then match that up against your current polling or any other polling you see in the public domain. You get the reports back on a regular basis, almost nightly from the media on not only what ads are being played, but what their effectiveness are in what markets. And really, it's like a big puzzle. And there are sort of, days where you'll, finally, I see it. I mean, this is exactly what I've been looking for, the opportunity in the Philadelphia suburb media market in this one demographic, and we try to, move resources there. But look, I mean, you look at this campaign, and you look at the amount of resources we had to work with. This was not a general election that was done on the cheap. We raised $200 million more than George Bush did for his reelection in 2004, and everyone thought that was a record that would be hard to break. 200 million more. They raised 300 or 400 million more than we raised. And so when you look at the technology that you have available to communicate with people, whether it's on an internet-based system or a VoIP system, it's really phenomenal, the engagement. And I think this election proved that you get people engaged, especially as David talked about at the local level. and you make them invested in it, you can actually have these conversations with literally millions of people on a daily basis. And that is what's changed dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Sandeep. I'm a second-year business school student. My question is to the Obama team. What did you do, or what was it about the campaign organization that allows you to enforce such discipline in the messaging to the media despite having such a large organization? And how did you avoid infighting that you might see traditionally in the political campaigns?
David mentioned before that Obama wanted to have a grassroots campaign, but I remember very clearly the first conversation we had as a senior staff, and we came together really quickly because he really did have no intention of running for president in 2008. It really was a late decision, and it was kind of a fire drill putting this together. This guy did a remarkable job putting what ultimately was a huge organization together in a very short period of time. But we had a small senior staff to start with, and he said, I've got 3 rules that I absolutely am going to enforce. Number 1 is this is going to be a grassroots campaign because I believe in it. I don't think change ever begins anywhere but from the grassroots. And I don't think a candidate like me has a chance any other way. Number 2, we're a team. We're going to rise and fall together. And if I see people throwing sharp elbows, if I see people stabbing each other in the back or leaking on each other, then they're not going to be here anymore. And he, by his own example, enforced that, because I can't think of one time in the whole campaign. At our worst moments, he was at his best. And he would call us together and he would say, I remember after the Texas and Ohio primaries, we lost. We spent $20 million losing. All in all, it was a very sorry situation. And he came into the office unannounced, went around to each of the kids who works there, and there were hundreds of them, and he said, we're gonna get, I appreciate everything you're doing, keep your chin up, we're gonna get to where we need to go. And then he got to us, and he started off and he said, I can think of 12 things I could have done better in the last 2 weeks. And I bet you everybody around this table can think of 12 things or more that they could have done better in the last few weeks. So I'm not here to fix blame. I want to learn from this and figure out what we have to do to correct the mistakes that we made. We had a very constructive meeting. He got up to leave. He turned around and said, I'm not yelling at you guys. And he started walking again, and then he turned around again and said, of course, after blowing $20 million in 2 weeks, I could yell at you. He said, but I'm not yelling at you. And he laughed and he left. And had he yelled at us, it wouldn't have been nearly as effective. But we were not just a team, but a family. And we supported each other. We believed in each other. That's the culture that he encouraged. That's the culture that we believed in. And we ultimately became a source of pride to us that we didn't leak. So you can imagine the transition process is a little difficult for us. But it was really the culture of the campaign, and it came right from the top. We, as the senior people in the campaign, tried to enforce that. But it wasn't hard because everybody kind of bought into it.
And it was important, though, for this reason. We got to the point where we just never gave any thought that we would have a meeting or do a conference call and the contents of that discussion would get out. So it gave you real freedom to discuss these things.
And we hated that.
Yes, I know. But it made us.
I love that you
yes,
that.
I know.
We did. It was a source of pride, but it made us a much better campaign. We just did not have that dynamic in our campaign. And, it's going to sound hokey, but, we were a family. It was, we've been a part of great campaigns and worked for great people, but it was really a joy to go to work every day with these guys. He was my partner in crime for 22 months, and I missed that collaboration that we had.
But he doesn't miss it enough to go to work at the White House.
That's right, not that much. It made us, I think that, and again, it's going to sound kind of Pollyannish, but we trusted each other. We had a sense of mission. Barack every day went out there and I think performed in a way that we found admirable, and and he treated people well. Demand excellence, but treated people well. So it was just a great culture. And these presidential campaigns are brutal. And so if you layer in any kind of infighting or concern about the security of your conversations, the candidate psychology, it can make them almost intolerable. And we didn't have any of that. So we could focus largely on just executing day in and day out. And that can't be overstated how important that was.
I have time for one more question, and it's your turn.
All right. My name's Nate Horning. I started as a field organizer in Iowa for the Obama campaign in March of last year. Went all over the country. I ended up running GOTV in Lake County, Indiana for the general election. So my question is, where did the idea for the Houdini project come about? What happened to it on election day? And do you think it'll be attempted
The what
again
project?
in the future? The Houdini project, I think.
Well, everybody else needs to know what you're talking about, too.
Well, we had this idea to get people in the polls. The traditional poll watching roles would be reported in real time so that the names of people who had already voted that we had on our list would be removed automatically, so that when we did reprints of walk lists and call lists, we'd be able to get to the people that had not gotten to the polls with some degree of certainty. And
But it didn't happen on Election Day?
it fell apart around 9 o'clock in the
happened?
morning.
You know, there was a lot of it was based on phone reporting, and there was just a volume issue, a capacity issue.
Especially in Lake County, Indiana.
Yeah. Yeah. We didn't have to wait as long as we did in the primary for Lake County to come in. Thank you, by the way. That was a remarkable job in Lake County, Indiana. So basically, the technology kind of crashed. We were able to get around it because the states obviously were able to, kind of get that data in instantaneously. So it really didn't hamper what we were doing. It was more of a hindrance in Chicago because we couldn't see right in front of us what was happening to the degree we wanted to. But no, we'll try it again. It'll work. What we basically, it was kind of an old school problem. There was just too many phones. We didn't know if there was malfeasance going on. I'm sure there wasn't. But we were having, our lines were just,
now he says he's sure.
Thousands and, yeah, no, our reporting
I
lines
didn't go
were
to
jammed.
Harvard. What's that mean?
Yeah. So it was, I would say it was a temporary glitch, but a good lesson that you have to have a backup, and all you guys in the States were able to work around it. And you knew who voted in the States. It maybe took a little bit of while. We had to drive things the old-fashioned way, but it worked.
Thanks, everybody who's still waiting for questions. We're sorry we couldn't get to you all, but thank you to our panel, Bill Mcintyre, Rick Davis, David Clough, and David Axelrod. Thank you.